Did Swedenborg have any dialogue with Jesus?
Did the angels help us find and connect with our soulmate?
Does Swedenborg mention suicide?
Will we be able to see God when we pass
God
away?
is omniscient, and why would he
How
allow
can someone gain heavenly reward?
Is the afterlife more mindful?
God is our soul. I'm wondering if Jesus
Why can storms
Does Swedenborg tell us anything about our spirit?
Is there any particular
Welcome back to another installment in our Spiritual Questions Answered series. I'm your host, not Curtis Childs. I am Chelsea Odner. Don't worry, Curtis will be back next. Enthusiasts to respond to your questions. Immediately to my left is Chris Dunn. So you've seen him. He's been in our 10 questions show, and he may have already answered your questions because he moderates the YouTube channel. He is an MDiv student at Bernathen College. And then to his left is Cara Dom, Latin consultant for the New Century edition, familiar face. And further to her left is Dr. Jonathan Rose, series editor for the New Century edition of the Theological Works of Emanuel Swedenborg. And if we could call you Jonathan, then all of our names would start with CH, and that would be very satisfying. So, sorry, we'll go with the J, though, because it's just what's true. So, get your questions in, because this is a live question and response. Answer is maybe a little bit setting the bar high, so we're just wanting to respond thoughtfully and charitably to your questions, and hope we have some good little nuggets of spiritual nutrition for you over the next hour. So, let's get to our first question. So Nicole asks, what's the meaning of baptism by water and fire? So let's see, this question, I know colloquially there's the idea of, that was a baptism by fire, to say, I had to be, it was through a hard experience that I learned these things that I know. But it also makes me think of, there's the, in the New Testament, right, is John the Baptist says something about, I baptize you with water, but someone coming, JSR, do you have a...
Yeah, that he says that someone who's coming who will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire. So it's contrasting John the Baptist's baptism with water with Jesus' baptism with the Holy Spirit and with fire.
Nice. And so what is the meaning of that? I mean, we just did a whole show on the spiritual meaning of water, and that was an interesting insight that I got from that, working on that show, was that water, is just it means truth. And so a baptism of truth is whatever truth does to you in your life. But light also corresponds to truth, according to Swedenborg. And so if you're comparing the light of the sun with water on earth, then you have this different levels going on there. Water on earth is sort of a lower vessel even that can receive light or something. So if fire is this light and warmth, then is this, a baptism by fire is something even deeper, perhaps? Any other thoughts?
My first thought is, of course, adults get baptized too, but so water is truth. It's on the, it's what we do with our bodies. And I'm thinking of adults who baptize their children. And that's more a statement on the part of the parents that they're going to provide truth for this child. Right. And then, so the fire makes me think of love, which makes me think on the inside of that baby who's being baptized. And that eventually that's where it's going to have to end up. It starts with the truth on the outside and has to end up with the love on the inside. Right. In terms of turning toward truth and God. And
that makes sense. If people who are getting baptized by water from John the Baptist, they are learning about God from somebody else. And then a baptism by fire, when it's Jesus, is that's when you're meeting the Lord for yourself, or you're having a relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, and an interesting aspect of this is that Swedenborg says that baptism means rebirth. It means regeneration. So there's a process there. And you can see this a little bit when Jesus says to his disciples, they want to sit at his right and his left. And he says, can you drink the cup that I drink, and can you be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with? Now, he was baptized already years before he said that, but he's talking about a process that he's still going through of change and transformation. And so our baptism, so we have a first baptism from the Word, which is what John the Baptist stands for, the Bible, and then there's a second one from divine truth, which is the Holy Spirit, and from divine love. And basically, as far as I understand that, it's a process that the Lord puts us through of transforming our heart and mind. And that's an ongoing, that baptism is an ongoing, is not a one-shot thing. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah. That's great. I feel like I'm learning new insights about that whole idea. Do you have any thought you want to share, Chris? Or
No, you
feeling
guys
good? Yeah.
really good. Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Well, that's great. Let's see. What's our next question? Nicole, you want to hear more about? Okay.
There we go.
Jade is asking, Swedenborg often talks about the Lord's human nature, example, glorifying it. By the Lord's human nature, does he mean truth, his body? What exactly is meant? Right. So the Lord's human nature, I think in Swedenborg's terms, is specifically meaning the human body he took on in the world, specifically like the heredity, he needed that evil heredity in order to have hell have access to him so he could overcome hell, right? But then, but at the same time, I'm interested myself as a Swedenborgian because Swedenborg writes about God the Father being a symbol of love and God the Son being a symbol of divine truth. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that. Those are some initial thoughts from me.
Do you want me to have
Sure,
a go?
please.
I think it's a great question. Very insightful question. And I think it does kind of mean both. I think of Jesus when he was young, he was, in a weird sense, I don't want to make it sound too much like superheroes, but I think it was like half divine, half human in a sense. Like he had a human mother and a divine father. And so that whole human part, I think, is the human nature. It was the body, it was the flesh. You can see that was important because he was resurrected with all that flesh. But also his lower mind was a very important piece of it. His thoughts, his feeling, that outer self kind of thing that corresponds to an outer self in us. And and Swedenborg does say that is a reflection of truth. I was just thinking today, I didn't know this question was coming, but I was thinking about the fact that Swedenborg says that truth is the form of love. It's a container for love. And so his human nature was like a truth or a container for the love that he was becoming more and more identified with inside. So hope that gets somewhere toward answering that question. Well, that's a great question.
Yeah, along those ideas of form or the essence of love and the form of truth, that God is love itself, and yet he makes himself known to us through truth. And so in that way, definitely Jesus, his human nature is truth, because that is what we can get to know immediately, and then we can learn more and more about the deeper elements of that. But
yeah, I love the idea that, and this is kind of taking a sidestep, but how the process of glorification that Jesus underwent became the model by which we really have in our regeneration. So you have this, this big system happening with Jesus, this whole process of glorification, but there's meaning for us in our own personal lives with that. That's the path by which we can align ourselves with the Lord, conquer evils, embrace divine love, and let ourselves be vessels of the Lord's divine love into the world. So I just think it's a cool model just to base your life off of as well. He provides that for us.
Yeah, and it is interesting that, like, in some ways Swedenborg can reserve the term truth to mean divine truth, which is this pure, essence of wisdom, divine wisdom. But then he talks about almost different levels of truth. Like we were just saying, water corresponds to truth, but what kind of truth is that? Is that sort of like the Lord's human nature earlier on in his life as he himself was going through this process? And then he himself is walking the path of, I don't know what you'd call that, but this evolution of truth until ultimately he glorifies it and becomes one with divine love. So,
Yeah, that sort of reflects the thought I'm having right now, which is that we are created in the image and likeness of God. So God is human, divine human. That's as high as you can get, and we're created in that image. But then Jesus comes down and takes on this very mundane, human condition, and lives through the life of
all the filth and the
just a human being that's getting through life. We're having a completely different inside experience than we all have, but just that we can know that he understands waking up too early in the morning, stubbing your toe, whatever, this mundane stuff, that he experienced all that too. And so he's both the ultimate human being, and he experienced the lowest parts of being human.
It's good.
That's great. So that's kind of a both and answer to that question. And we can't be so exact, but we hope that's some good food for thought. Let's see what we have next. So yellow 6100. How much of Swedenborg's works should be not taken literally? We all audibly. So I wonder, the first thing that brings to my mind is a quote that we came across in working on a show once that was brought to my attention, of Swedenborg himself saying, it's so crude what I'm writing here to try to get across these spiritual truths and these spiritual realities. I wish I could, words fail. And so depending on what it means, what you mean by the word literally there, is I guess what this really comes down to, is like, in a way, words we can't depend entirely on words. You have to try to read between the lines, because that's just what we do as human beings, right? But I don't know. Other thoughts?
I'm just thinking that any revelation, that revelation is something that happens for an individual in their own individual spirit. And so that anyone's reading of any sacred text is going to result in a different kind of spiritual awakening, because it's mine and not yours. You know what I mean? So, there are some people that think a lot of Swedenborg's works are allegorical or something like that, and some people think that you need to take it all word for word. And so I just think that's up to the individual and the Lord, and they're going to work out what that balance is.
Yeah.
Right. So there's not really a should there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Right.
So how much should be not taken literally as well? Just read it and see what's mixed or stirred up.
Yeah.
In you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that I do think Swedenborg's analogies, some of his stories of his spiritual experiences have all this imagery in them.
Yeah.
I think some of that is at least can be read in multiple ways. As Cara said, there are schools of there's there are not millions and millions of people who have been studying Swedenborg in the past, but of the people who have, they break into certain camps about whether is there deeper layers of meaning. Can you read Swedenborg in the same way you read Scripture or not? And but I do think like taking some of the examples of what he'll say about certain religions or certain races of people or things like that.
Right.
Some people read that more internally. That's all something within us.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's that there's, don't take this book literally, but take that book literally.
Yeah.
It all has something to offer that the literal is always sort of a platform that you take to go deeper into it. But it is interesting, even in terms of relationship between the sexes that Swedenborg talks about, to think of that in terms of heart and mind. And so, there are just interesting layers that you can go into inside there. But I don't have sort of a pat answer about, 39% or something,
And it's interesting, this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but if you should take Swedenborg's work literally, then we'd all be out of a job. I mean, on the Swedenborg and Life show, our work is to take what can be very naughty. What does he mean by all, like you said, of all races of this or that are such and such? It's like, well, actually there's some really good spiritual nuggets of truth in there if you kind of see past some of the, gritty stuff on the surface sometimes, like that is useful. But then again, to each his own sort of a thing in terms of interpretation.
Yeah, I tend to think, there's, I like how you said, to each his own. For me, the things that I take probably the most serious within the writings of Swedenborg is those precepts that allow me to develop a deeper sense of faith and a deeper sense of relationship with the Lord. So he has all these kind of what he calls genuine truths that help you to live a more flourishing spiritual life. And so it's not, at least for myself, that I disregard some things and take some other things, but it's more so I have emphasis and I put a lot of my my spiritual energy into these concepts within the writings that really just make me feel empowered to live a life of love. And there's so much in that, and that's one of the reasons why I love Swedenborg's writings so much.
Right.
So.
And that is, I mean, Swedenborg even says in reading the Bible, to have that compass is your best gauge for finding the truth that you need for your spiritual life, is to have that aim at living a life of love and what is helping you on your journey. That there always is something you have to work through there on the surface. So.
And he also talks about this quality of affirmative doubt.
Yeah.
He says there's negative doubt where you just sort of question everything and tear it apart. But there's affirmative doubt where you say, I don't see this, for myself, but like, I'm going to hang in there. I mean, I trust a lot of things that he says, so I'm going to hang in there and see if over time. Often I've had the experience of where Swedenborg says something, and at first I think it's just the weirdest thing I ever heard. And then as I go through life, I realize, no, I'm kind of living in that story, so they grow on me over time.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and I know people that use what they call, and this is a little bit what we were saying before, but they call it the in me tool. Reading the writings with the in me tool. So after every sentence or whatever, you put in me, and so whether you're talking about the nature of the German race or the relationship between husband and wife or spirits from another planet, if you put in me at the end of it, then you can just reflect on like, oh, what does this do with my inner marriage of good and truth, or my the way I relate to people, or
yeah, totally. Or even my choices for the relationships. It all comes down to your independent freedom, but you can be choosing consciously to, I want to apply this truth to this circle of my life or something, in that case. And for somebody else, it might be different. Yeah. Cool. Any final words before I jump to the next question? Just begging to get in there.
No,
all right.
Please.
All right, let's see what the next question is. Thanks, Jade, for that question. All right, Christine asks, what happens when two people die together side by side? Do they see each other when they cross over? It's a very sweet question. I wonder. I think...
eventually, at least.
Yeah, you'd think.
Eventually, at least.
I keep jumping in with the first thought, but I want to leave that open for anybody else who felt like if they had anything immediately jumped to mind.
Well, one thing that I thought of was that Raymond Moody talks about in one of his later books about shared near-death experiences, where someone who's not even dying, who's perfectly physically well, who's with a loved one who's dying, actually goes with them into the tunnel, sees their life review, and he reports a number of these kind of experiences. So that's really interesting. So if that can happen to a perfectly healthy person, you imagine it could happen to another person who was dying. But I also think there's something, it so much depends on the relationship between the people in a certain way. everyone has their own journey kind of thing. So I can imagine the two people could be lying side by side, whether it's in a hospital, a battlefield, or car accident, or wherever it is, and they might take a different. They might not see. It depends on the love relationship, or right. What their connection is with each other. Because Swedenborg says that thought brings presence and love brings conjunction. So it partly depends on, if they're just total strangers who happen to be, dying on the bus together or something like that. They may or may not see each other going over. I'm not sure. And
in our show, was it just called "What Happens to You When You Die," or how angels take care of us when we die? That's what it's called, and that is what it is about. Is this process that our consciousness goes through when we cross over, and we are taken immediately to the highest of angels, where we each have these celestial angels present to us, communing with us in love or whatever, and then we come down through levels, to whatever level we're comfortable with of, then spiritual angels. And so he talks about regaining his thought at a certain point, and so it would certainly, then we also have that show, blanking on the name, but it's about space in the appearance of space. And so that is according to state. And so if two people, even if they, or whole slews of people who pass away. I mean, it is heartbreaking, but the attacks that have been happening around the world lately, just all of these people crossing over at once. But to know that they all have individual care,
That's right.
The ratio is good of angel to humans crossing over ratio, but that whatever state they come to, it would be appropriate to them. They'll be surrounded by people who are like them.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's a deeply personal kind of thing, and if someone else is part of your deeply personal thing, you see them. And Swedenborg certainly says that you very soon see loved ones and you reunite, that kind of thing. I don't know about the actual crossing. It's an interesting question. I don't know if there are NDEs that talk about this. But
Swedenborg talks about, maybe it's in his memorable occurrences or something, but he says that sometimes people don't even know that they're dead. I mean, that they're no longer in this world, which to me would imply some continuous experience from this side to that side. But usually I think of the, everyone as in an individual ends up with the highest angels being loved to death.
Right.
So I don't know.
So it may start out in a shared experience, as you're saying. Because
maybe
you're there in the. It's a gentle sort of crossing. So you're experiencing the same kind of thing, and then you're taken off.
Maybe,
Swedenborg was able to be conscious of that experience of having the presence of celestial angels with him, but maybe to most of us that isn't so much a conscious experience. It just is what is happening. You're just cradled in love, and then you come to, and you're like, here I am, or something. I wonder.
It seems like my reading of that scene is a very sleepy scene, but one of incredible protection by angels that exhibit above all mercy, that just have a desire to compassionately protect and give love to those people that are vulnerable and crossing over into a realm that is, they can be new, but they are so well cared for. And that is such a tender scene.
And I would think of, I've only heard stories, but of married partners who pass away within hours of each other or something, that it's you just get the sense that, they're going to wake up and still be right next to each other.
Right.
I tend to think so.
That's what I assumed.
Is that
from the question, but maybe they weren't. Because if they have
that
kind of scenario
in the Swedenborgian understanding, then because you have that tender love for each other, so you are that protective love quality that you would. Want around, you're the loved one that you're wanting to see, or something as the other person.
And I do think about the unity of love within two people. Swedenborg writes that that two people deeply in love become almost like one angel in the spiritual world, and that marriage of two people together for eternity. I'm not sure how soon it starts, but I know that is what's coming for two people that share that bond of love. That is so deep.
And he says that that's more and more possible in our day and age, that people can be establishing spiritual unions with other people
Yeah.
In that way. Great. Thank you, Christine. Let's see what our next question is. We are on a roll. Eternal Spring is asking, if our soulmate is already in heaven, is there any contact while we are on Earth? So, yeah.
I have a thought about this if you want.
Please.
I was interested to read something that Swedenborg wrote, actually in his work on other planets of all things, but he talks at some length in there about contact between the worlds. And he kind of has two categories. One I would call sort of normal people, like people in a sort of normal situation. Their loved ones will be present with their minds and hearts. They will be aware of what they're thinking and feeling. They don't know whether they're at the store or at the opera or driving their car or whatever. They don't know what's going on in their lives. They don't see the things in their lives, but they feel their feelings, and they're aware of their thoughts. And that's the way it is for a lot of people. But Swedenborg says there's another category of people who've reached a level of spiritual awakening where the people in the other world can actually physically see through your eyes. It's a neat concept that our eyes are like a camera for the spirit, that other people can look in your lens and physically see what you're seeing around you. He talks about people in the other world seeing through his eyes their loved ones in this world or whatever, and so that's a second category, more rare, I guess, but not unheard of. That there's that kind of. So it depends what you mean by contact. I know from other people, I know from my own experience that you have a dream or you think of somebody or whatever. It's subtle and it's all too brief, and not a whole lot of content a lot of the time. It's just a simple thing like I'm okay, or thinking about you or whatever. But there is some of that. I've come to think it's all strictly regulated. Curtis and I did a show a few years ago about why don't our loved ones contact us after death?
Communicate with us more.
Communicate with some title like that, and I think it's strictly regulated, but under circumstances where an individual is ready to, when they have that safe contact with the other world, then they're able to be a bridge like that.
Yeah, I liked what you said about, conscious contact just out of the blue is not entirely common, but that doesn't mean there isn't contact already going on already on the level of your heart and sort of deeper thought, and so often I find with my own experience of this, and with what Swedenborg writes about it, is that that our spiritual experience is a matter of sort of tuning into subtler feelings that we might be having, so like that.
That's right.
People wonder, I had a dream about this person and, was it real or something? And it's like, well, how did it make you feel is somewhat of a good indicator of, and even just to have the humility to say, oh wow, I feel so joyful or so, delighted after having this dream that I could trust or accept that really means that there was some closer contact or some, something that happened.
And this eternal spring is mentioned specifically soulmate. Not just any old loved one, but just talking to people that I know, the spouse that's left behind or the soulmate left behind, it just, the experiences across the board. Some people feel very connected and feel like they're sharing intimate moments with their husband on the other side or whatever, and some people get nothing, like they just, there's no contact at all. And I would just like to say, don't judge your relationship on whether or not you're experiencing a lot of contact.
That's right.
Because I don't know what, like Jonathan said, it's strictly regulated, and I don't know the rules. Why do some people get to feel it and some people don't? But
I
Hold
remember
yourself gently if you're disappointed, I guess.
I remember a woman who'd been widowed who for a few years who said that her late husband seems to talk to everybody except her. Everybody comes up to her and says, "Oh yeah, I had a dream. Oh yeah, I saw it."
Yeah. Can be so frustrating.
Chris?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's see. Thanks, Eternal Spring. What's our next question? Let's see. Evelyn, do our prayers for our loved ones who have passed on even help them in heaven? What a great question. Thanks, Evelyn. Do our prayers for our loved ones who have passed on even help them in heaven? I remember doing a little piece for one of our shows a while ago about, we were talking about how the spiritual world is like the internet, and we were saying, drawing a spiritual correspondence to hashtags, and that is, you use hashtags to be able to find things that are related to that thing on the interwebs, and so that through prayer, that is sort of like what we're doing, is we're hashtagging ourselves and inviting, so I just, in terms of like in the spiritual world, you are, there is sort of or Swedenborg talks about it in terms of auras. You do have an aura, and it can have an effect on other people. And so if in a prayer or something you are, I think Swedenborg writes about how important it is when we pray to submit our will to the Lord's will, because we don't know what's right for the other person. Like the Lord is taking care of everybody's path on the other side. But we, if it's within the Lord's will, then if we are making that choice to send love or whatever it is to somebody who's on the other side, I do think that has an effect. Yeah. Any other? Jonathan? Yeah.
I just love never hurts. I mean, yeah, but I don't know the answer. Jonathan?
Yeah, no, I don't know either, but I think
who said anything about answers?
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, that's right.
Response.
I know there's the idea in some branches of Christianity that it's so important to pray for your loved ones. Like if they're in purgatory, they can get out of purgatory and that kind of thing. And but I think prayer kind of suits all circumstances or whatever. And I know some people think that the praying is good for you. It's good for your heart, and it is good for us. And we are told to do that, and so on. Even with our enemies, and so on, we're told to do that. But I think it's also, those studies that they did medically with just total strangers recovering from heart surgery, that the group that was prayed for had better recovery times. And, something does actually seem to reach out through some spiritual dimension and touch the other person and have some benefit to them. And I know that I always love it when somebody says, well, I'm praying for you, or what, right. I don't know, like it's a positive feeling.
That brings to mind the fact that, the basic thing that Swedenborg says that I love when he just it's so clear cut that heaven, mutual love, the Lord wants to bring things together, is a matter of uniting things. Hell just wants to cut things apart. I always play devil's advocate with myself, and I realize, of course, truth is sort of a discerner. It deciphers between things, but hell is really wanting to cut things apart in a harmful, losing touch with other people sort of a way. And so I feel like one of the core things that prayer does is reach out to somebody for community. To realize when people pray for other people, talking about studies and stuff is just understanding how important community is for people and how healing that is, how we are these community creatures, we need each other and we aren't just these solo things. And so to have something like prayer, even on a spiritual level, you think, because I've thought of, friends and loved ones of mine who have died in unfortunate circumstances, that if they are going through some sort of trial or something on the other side, does my praying for them help at all? But I think in some way it is this reaching out of saying, you are part of my community, I still care about you. I'm sending you my love. And then whatever it is in the Lord's will of well, of course that person's going to have to work through whatever they need to work through. but it's this like webbing of we're all in this together. And the more of that, then the more like heaven can do the work that heaven loves to do, because it's this creating connection with people, you know?
Wow.
That's beautiful.
That was inspiring. Yeah. As a mic drop comment right there.
Well, mic drop, it would be too loud.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Evelyn, for that question. Let's see. Let's bring on another. Birel. Could you say how angels help us? Maybe a big question. Yeah. I just think there are so many ways that question could be responded to.
Yeah, can I jump in?
Please do.
Would that be cool? I want to start by saying how they're forbidden to help us. There's a particular. They are apparently, Swedenborg says, not allowed to give us under most circumstances to give us a new idea, a new religious or spiritual perspective, to change our, they're not allowed to interfere with our freedom. There are things that they have to hold back on. So a friend of mine said to me recently that prayer is a way of defeating the restrictions on your angels. Like once you ask, they're allowed to help you because you asked, And so some of it depends on our asking. There are things they can't just preemptively, look, you just need this, or something. So it's quite different what the equation is when they're invited in as opposed to not. And if they're invited in, some of the main things that they can do for us does have to do with the state of our hearts and minds, give us encouragement or hope or ideas or inspiration or understanding or love or compassion or perspective, things of that kind. It sounds from what I read in Swedenborg that that's more effective. It's not that you can't pray for your car or for whatever, but that those are the things that they can really answer, and in my experience, answer very quickly.
Yeah.
Sometimes very quickly. Whereas things like, I want my financial situation to improve, or I'm hoping for to be in a relationship or something. Those can take years to answer, so long that you forget you prayed it by the time you get the answer to the prayer. So I think it's a tricky deal how angels, how they're allowed to help us, but they support our freedom. They're not allowed to sort of push and shove us around.
I liked what you said about that being a way to overcome the restrictions on your prayer as overcoming the restrictions on your angels, because you need to give that signal that you want help, and then you can pay attention and they're right there with it, Anybody else have a thought?
In my translation work today, I had the sentence that one angel has more power than 1,000 spirits from hell.
Right.
So I think that angels are working on the protection. They're certainly working on the balancing out any dark influences that are threatening to take us over.
Can I jump in on that? Sorry, just as far as a thought in me that I like the core part where you're making a decision. They're not allowed to sort of direct that or steer that. But areas you're not paying so much attention to, they can protect. And it says when we've done something foolish, they try to, if that opened up a hell to us, they try to close that. But not if we're real attached to it, they sort of have to leave it alone. But so the picture I got was of a parent walking around behind a little kid.
Yes.
Where, okay, if the kid's determined to get that car, you're going to need to hand them something else. Oh, look at this. Oh. And then maybe you can get the car away, or you can, you know what I mean? It's constantly a game of working around the edges of the freedom of this other being. I think it's a little bit like the parent-child relationship.
That's fantastic. I also think, like, on the flip side, about how we and our thoughts influence angels or societies in heaven as well. Like I remember reading in the writings about how, say you're reading from the Word, and those specific passages that you're reading actually kind of sent up. It's like little gems sent up to angelic communities that take joy in connecting with you in their spiritual understanding of what you're reading on the natural level. So it just, I don't know, it's cool when you're reading just to think, like, we actually, what we're taking joy in here is actually, it's shared. It's shared by many, and it's permeating the spiritual world, and there's an immense network of love and harmony with what we're reading on so many different levels.
It's a two-way
Right.
communication.
That's right.
I mean, how you say angels help us is like we talked about in our. I'm blanking on the name of the show again, but about how our thoughts are feeding angels, that we are rooting, this foundation for these angelic communities. And so when we have a thought that, is in harmony with a certain community, they are all jazzed about it, they get a boost.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, here it is Easter week, that when Jesus was praying and he was in agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, it doesn't say in one of the Gospels that angels came and strengthened him. Like there's they can strengthen us when we're asking for that help. They can give us power.
And even when we're not asking for it, in this case of sort of that behind the scenes presence, is Swedenborg says that when we're going through our hardest moments, we feel so alone, but not only the Lord is present there, but angels are there, being presences of the Lord with us too, of comforting us and curbing the hell. State.
It's a profound thing, especially when you're thinking about the fact that, like, we may feel alone at any given point, but we are so in the company of so many different beings that are looking out for our best interests and just wanting us to feel like we're part of a system that is not just us.
Yep.
That's right. That's
totally.
right. Never alone. Swedenborg says there are always angels with all of us.
That's great. Okay, thanks, Birel. I hope I'm not totally mispronouncing your name. Let's go for another question. Kathy, did Swedenborg ever describe the lower earth? I think that's a yes. But I'm trying to think, where else does the lower earth term show up? Swedenborg talks about it, but is it just a concept in other mythologies and, that kind of a thing?
I'm not sure about that, but
okay.
It is, like Swedenborg talks about this lower earth or the underground realm, and he cites biblical passages that talk about the lower parts of the earth, or it's translated different ways.
Is that also like pits and stuff?
When it talks about the pit, when I go down to the pit and the lower parts of the earth and things like that, and it's confusing. And where did Jesus go with the harrowing of hell? Like after he was resurrected, there's this idea in some of the epistles, and that he not only went up, but he went down somewhere and helped out people who were there, the souls under the altar, and that. But it's kind of confusing in Scripture to figure out what it's talking about.
Yeah.
But Swedenborg does describe it quite a bit.
Yeah, and it is in Scripture, I guess. And I wonder, because post, Jesus coming into the world and overcoming hell and stuff, that opened us up from, Swedenborg talks about how hell was, the human race was at the point of damnation because the power of hell was overcoming the power of heaven. And so I can sort of think of that as like we were swamped in hell at that point, and then he shows us the way out, how we can get out of that and be freed from hell. And I wonder if in our own lives, I recently read that, I didn't know this before, but that the word Satan in the Old Testament is a noun and a verb, and it just means like the accuser or to accuse. And those Psalms that talk about being in the pit and that kind of thing are, my enemies were all around me, they were all accusing me, they were da-da-da-da, and like that just sounds like, yeah, you are in, like, because if you are just being attacked by hell, is that being in the lower earth, like you're still a human, so you haven't chosen hell, so you're not there because it's your spiritual home, but you're sort of descended into it. And is that like being in that pit and having the accusers, hell giving us horrible thoughts or whatever.
Should I just give a little
mumble of thoughts
outline of what he's...
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, basically, I was confused about this for a long time. As I read this term, what is Swedenborg talking about? The lower earth. He describes in some passages that there's an area, he says that after we die, we go to a place called the world of spirits. Most people go directly to the world of spirits, which is halfway in between heaven and hell. And that's where people get sorted out, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about tonight. At the bottom, what does bottom mean? But the lowest part of the world of spirits, right next to hell, but it isn't hell, is this area called the lower earth, or the underground realm. And when Swedenborg describes it, he gives very strange descriptions. Like, it's hard for me to fathom, but it literally does sound like it's underground. Sometimes people like come up through the ground and appear at the next level up. Sometimes there's a ladder that goes down, and you go down into it. You can't see the sun from down there. It really is like underground. Sometimes he even describes it, this gets even weirder, that it's full of water. Like the people are fine, they're not drowning. But the appearance is, because of the things that they're thinking, that they're surrounded with water.
Right, being flooded by...
That's right. And so what you were saying about Satan and so on, Swedenborg describes it as a state in which you are thinking, what you're thinking is false. There's something untrue in what you're thinking. I found this so helpful psychologically, because when I'm stuck or when I'm in the pit or something like that, to think, I don't know what it is that I've got wrong, but there's something that I've got wrong.
Right.
I feel hopeless about something that there's actually encouragement about. And Swedenborg says that when you're in that pit, you might be surrounded by hell and you might have all these false thoughts, but there's an opening straight up above to God, like there's a connection, there's still a vertical connection, and people get lifted up out of there and are very relieved to be released and so on.
Wow. That's great. Thanks. Hope those were some good thoughts. Kathy, let's take one more question. Matt. Evil seems to make more inroads and be louder than good. Yes. I do think there is good. Yes. If we can't communicate with the spiritual realm, why is evil allowed to be as invasive as it is? Great question, Matt.
Good one.
What a doozy.
Being louder than good, that I can really resonate with that.
That is great. That is awesome.
Because it's so easy to focus on what your problems are when you might have, 100 blessings and two really tough problems, and all we can see is the tough problems.
Yes. And that's that two thoughts that come to my mind. One is, that's the problem of that this has to be a self-agency kind of choosing goodness. It's that it always is going to take, like, you're always going to be going against the current a little bit to choose goodness, because that's what makes it like you're really wanting that. It's not just, he says, we talked about in the conscience show, that people who are good-natured don't have conscience just because they're good-natured people. They just have a good nature, and that's fine, but they still need to develop conscience. And that's still this going against the current of the loud evil to say, I'm going to focus on the good. I'm going to, start turning in this direction. And then, of course, the Lord is really the one who is making us, go forward in that. And one other element is that Swedenborg says that as long as we're in this world, hell is of this world in a way. It's physical focused. It's not so spiritually focused. And so if we are interacting in this world, then it is just easier for us to be coming up against hell-related kinds of things, because spiritual truth is just above or within and deep to this world. And so you have to sort of make this choice to, on a practical side of it, I always laugh at myself when I get out of the habit of meditating or taking time for 10 minutes of silence to turn inward, because it seems like the easiest thing. It has such huge rewards in terms of tuning me into that spiritual presence of goodness. And But if I get out of habit with that, then, you know, in a week I'm totally in the lower earth, you know, like I am just down in the, you know, pit again or something. And so those are some.
Yeah, I think I kind of talked a little bit about this in one of the 10 questions shows about the reason why the Lord permits evils in the divine design. And I think one of the things that I think, so the last part of this question is, why is evil allowed to be as invasive as it is?
Right.
And that's such a hard such a hard question to answer in a very like A, B, C, D kind of way, you know, like, oh, here's why, and you know, it's a clear cut answer. Because in a way I want to honor the fact that like when we're dealing in the midst of suffering and evil and it's loud, that's really hard, and it's confusing and it's murky territory at times. At least it seems to me that way. But what I've always kept in mind was that even those moments where the darkness seems to be kind of bellowing around us, those are kind of the stepping stones that allow me to see some spiritual growth elements through that. Perfect example.
Right.
I have a friend and a mentor. She's a survivor of the Holocaust, and she underwent some pretty horrible things. And for a lot of her life, she spent a lot of after being liberated, spent a lot of her time in deep pain about what she went through. She lost pretty much her entire family. And eventually she was able to realize that what had happened, albeit it was there, you can't justify that type of hatred. It was one of the worst acts in human history to have the Holocaust. But she found forgiveness in that, and she was able to teach that on a scale that taught the world what it meant to heal through pain. And that to me is one of those things where, evil there is obviously so incredibly invasive. Historically, it's probably one of the grander scales of evil permeating, you know, large amounts of people and just destroying everything. But the Lord doesn't permit those things unless they can be used in some way to help you grow spiritually. He doesn't allow evil, but he works with us as we suffer in a way that can help us provide meaning and hope out of really hard situations. And so for me, evil is allowed for that, and it's so hard. And so I just want to leave it with that.
And I think with even what you're saying, like true ideas are tools that we can use. Like I feel like in my own experience with that invasiveness of it is, I feel like I'm maybe getting a little bit better at remembering what I can do when I'm in those moments when it feels like this is way too loud, this is way too, you know, too much, you know, or something. And that there are tools lend us some, you know, ideas that can help us get through those really hard moments.
Carl?
I don't have anything to say except for how big and horrific evil is in the world. I mean, if we just read the newspaper today, there's just so much, and I just don't get it except for this. Which feels so platitudinous or something. You know, just in my own little individual life, it's one thing, but when you look at the horrors in the world, it's just it's a tough one.
Yeah, it is a very tough one. And Swedenborg says that he says about himself that he talks about how his consciousness would go up and down, his focus. And when his focus was on external and worldly or even, you know, evil, self-centered things or whatever, that he would be down there in some spiritual level, and it was so loud. And then when he would get out of there, it'd be so quiet. Like, where's that noise? You know, all that noise is going on down there.
Yeah.
He describes it in some passages as a 3-story house. And it's a pretty funny image to me. I mean, it's horrifying. But you have all this evil in the basement. All the evil's in the basement. It's always in the basement. That's where it is. And angels are sort of trying to talk through the floor, like, keep it down there, you know. But you can hardly hear this. Like, what did somebody? You know, the music is blasting, and as my hope for the human race is that as we become more spiritual, as people make individual choices and people link together and so on, and we rise up more in our spirits. There's been a long descent of going down and down into more and more attention to worldly, materialistic, financial, whatever kind of, and all that stuff needs to be paid attention to in your life. But it depends on what's dominant. Would you sell somebody down the river to get a little more money, or or even worse, torturing people or whatever? Mm-hmm. And if that starts to take the back seat to love, which it's predicted in Scripture that this will happen. And I love that vision very much. I think we'll become more able to hear the choirs of angels, and that other noise will sort of recede a little bit. But it does that invasive, the image of like these invasive species, or I've also quite the opposite image, but the way that it really has bothered me sometimes that like the desert just grows by a few feet every year, so like it just gets bigger. Like it never gets smaller. It's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There are things like that seem like they have this nature, and the why aloud is one of the most basic questions, but it's there for us to learn. Okay, that's the basement. That's noisy. That's the sort of voice that comes from the basement. Yeah. I can feel it in my own heart. I can see it on the news, so we start to be able to identify, okay, this is how I get up. This is how I use the stairs. Swedenborg says when you have when you have like love of God, love of the neighbor in the right order, and then below that is your love of material things and your love of yourself, then you can go up and down stairs at will, which is a cool idea. You can, hey, I'm in the basement. I can go upstairs. What happens to me a lot, and what happens to people a lot, I think, is that you get stuck in the basement because your basement's up near the top of the house, and then the stairs don't go anywhere. So, But
who built that house?
Right. So being able to, get up, learning how to rise up, and be able to see where we are, and then be able to go up is so important. And I think we'll all learn to do that as a human race.
Yeah. It reminds me, my grandfather lives in Tucson, and I would go for hikes with him, or I've been on several, and he would take me up to these mountains east of Tucson, where when you go up on them, you can look out over the city. And he would encourage me to think spiritually about it, that look, so much is going on down in the city. There could be anything happening down there, but you're up here and look how it just looks beautiful. There's just these lights. You feel this cool air. Yep, you see the moon and the stars, and that isn't that wonderful that the physical world offers us this revelation that we can use for our own lives, which is that there is this city, and that there is this lower plane where all hell can break loose, but there are these mountain places that we can go to and get above that, like you said, with the great house analogy. And I will lead us toward a closing, because if you tune in 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to be doing a show on sort of why we lose touch with those spiritual truths that we might want to believe. We might want to believe in goodness, but then the hell of this world can feel so like that can't possibly be true. And so that there's a lot to get in there, so that we'll be doing a show in a few weeks about that. Nice. But thanks so much, Matt, for that awesome closing question. So if you enjoyed what we all talked about tonight and got anything out of it, please like and subscribe. And if you want to go even further, then we would welcome you to make a donation, because that helps us create more of this content, and our fully produced Swedenborg and Life shows. And so we love this ongoing exchange that we get to have. And so this video has a little bit more about what we do. We want the ideas and insights we cover to be available for free to anyone, anytime they need them. That's why we offer Swedenborg's books as free downloads on Swedenborg.com, and we produce this show and other content on our Off the Left Eye YouTube channel with no paywall or ads. The only way to keep this up, though, is for those of you who like what we're doing and feel comfortable giving to give. If the idea of helping others have easy access to the content we produce feels meaningful to you, please consider supporting this cause with a donation. Give if you can, receive if you need. If we cycle through this way, in the end, everybody wins. That voice sounded oddly familiar. So next week, it won't be me. I'll miss you all, but it'll be Curtis Childs back in his center seat at the table, and you will be, the show that we have is, why did Jesus suffer and die? So we're going to be digging into a big question about that quote, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, and what does that mean? From what did Swedenborg unearth about that in his study of the Bible, and what can we gain from that? So please tune in next week, 8 p.m. Monday night. Thanks so much, and thanks to our panel. Thank you so much for lending your time and minds to these, and hearts to all these questions. It's a joy.
Thank you.
Thank
Chelsea.
you.
Thank you.
All right, see you next
Very
week.
fun.